fourth night in a row, there are street protests under the banner of the phrase Black Lives Matter. Those street protests, of course, have been happening all across the country. Last night, tonight, the night before last night. And it seems there has been a kind of state of perpetual backlash against Black Lives Matter from the beginning. And after the events of last week, and particularly after the brutal murder of those 5 cops, some were at it again.
And when you say Black Lives Matter, that's inherently racist.
Well, I think their
Black Lives Matter, white lives matter, Asian lives matter, Hispanic lives matter. That's anti-American and it's racist.
As a phrase, Black Lives Matter has had a remarkable degree of resonance across politics and culture, like very few political formulations in recent memory. It inspires pride and defiance, criticism, debate, even contemplation.
It is time for this nation to stand up with one voice and to condemn and shun this movement called Black Lives Matter.
I think it's ridiculous that here in America, all lives matter has now become politically incorrect.
Well, I think actually Carly Fiorina got it right this week, Eric, that all individuals matter. We're a country of individuals.
What do you mean all lives matter doesn't matter?
Yes.
All lives do matter.
I think the reason that the organizers used the phrase Black Lives Matters was not because they said they were suggesting nobody else's lives matter. Rather, what they were suggesting was there is a specific problem that is happening in the African-American community that's not happening in other communities.
But beneath it all, there's also been an interesting conversation happening around what to do about the problem of policing in America specifically. Joining me now, Heather McGee, president of Demos Action, and former New York City police officer Eugene O'Donnell, professor of law and police studies, John Jay College. It is remarkable to me how much this conversation quickly, like even on Facebook threads, veers into the phrase, like this phrase. When you hear people make the argument that Rudy Giuliani has made, how do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note that our country's hearts are big enough to hold grief for the men and women who were injured and hurt in the Dallas police force and the daily assault and often killing of unarmed black men by police officers. Our hearts are big enough for that. And I think it's important to note that our hearts are big enough to understand that while you're grieving at your cousin's funeral, saying, my cousin's life mattered, if someone else comes up and say, hey, but what about my uncle who's sick? That's actually not that relevant, right? We are talking about in this country Black Lives Mattering not just because it happens to be what is visible to us on social media right now, but because at the founding of this nation, black people were not people. Our ancestors were not people, they were in fact property. And so that is how our economy was built, that is how our democracy was built. And so this nation has unfinished business to do to say that black lives actually matter beyond what they were first created to do in this country, which is actually to benefit white landowning men.
I think, Heather, Eugene, I think one of the things that I have come to believe in the process of reporting on this and writing on this, I think that there is a way that people interpret the critique of policing that puts policing in some special category, right? So it's like there's American life and then there's policing, and policing is especially toxic, especially racist. And one of the things I think that's wrong, actually, is a critique, right? I mean, one of the things I think I've heard some of the Black Lives Matter folks say is policing isn't that different from other American institutions. It is the institution in which people are entrusted with committing violence in the state scene and having a gun.
Yeah, well, it is important to say Rudy Giuliani is a special category. This is a person that made a study out of the most divisive, inflammatory rhetoric with the African-American community, and sadly is a two-term mayor. So we're not talking about the crazy people speaking in the recesses of social media or somebody saying, you kill one of us, we'll kill two of you in a crowd. We're talking about somebody who every time he speaks on race hits a new low. I'm not even an African-American. I find one of the things, because I know his playbook, that I find particularly offensive is when he pretends to be talking to the African-American community, when he's really talking at the African-American community, and has nothing to say to them. He poisoned race relations in New York City almost irreparably. So we're trying to get a handle on this. He is one of the most extremist divisive people. I think I remember when he contemplated running for Senate against Mrs. Clinton. I believe the poll showed the African-American community, he had 0%. David Duke would have 1%. That's the kind of mayor he was. And people who saw him in action, and we can talk about how he destroyed the police profession as a labor mayor, but people of good faith should be calling this guy out. And what's scary is we have people running for high office here. If they said what they're saying out loud on Facebook as cops, they'd be terminated tomorrow morning. We got to come to grips, and the media is not a corrective. These are people that have been successful saying these things over and over again.
Can I follow up, and then I want to get your response, Heather? When you destroy the police profession, I think that syncs up with something that David Brown, Chief David Brown, was talking about, which is there was a tremendous amount from the policy on down to push officers to do more. That meant more citations. It meant more, quote, proactive policing, broken windows policing. It meant that assuming officers were lazy and having them do more. And the more they did, then they were doing their job best. And a lot of that did start here in New York City. Eugene.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. Yes, it did. Absolutely. This was, listen to Chief Brown. It's so instructive. A white chief can't quite do what he can do, but he can come very close. The difference we'd have a humanistic, heart-to-heart, concerning conversation with people that's empathetic and really grasps issues. There is an unlimited appetite for that in inner city America. But what we saw with the broken windows policing, by the way, this was imposed by think tanks, never really validated. A lot of it was quackery, to be honest with you. Not the idea that the police proactively are important. The idea that there was some science to it.
Right.
That if you did 100,000 stops, the city was a certain level of safety. 200,000, it was twice as safe. 300, that was quackery, and that was imposed. And by the way, some people would be very surprised if they talk to cops. A lot of the old-time cops actually would have resisted this whole simplistic thing. It was imposed on them by political people and outsiders. This was never something the police came up with.
Heather, this to me is a key thing because we focus on the moment of that a person's life ends, understandably, right? But that is the small tip of a huge spear, which is zooming out to think about how often do we require citizens and police to interact, and what do we want the police to do in a broad sense, which is, do we want them pulling people over taillights and writing tickets? Do we want them, what do we want them to do? That to me seems the fundamental question.
Right, and I think the desire for safety and justice and real community policing has been one of the central cries of the Black Lives Matter movement. What that has been so counterposed with is the reality of mass incarceration and mass criminalization, where you have police departments using working class people, black people, but also other people of color and working class white people to fund the revenue for their systems.
Right.
How deeply messed up is that? And that's one of the ways that trickle-down economics and austerity actually has led to the over-policing of communities.
All right, Heather McGee and Eugene O'Donnell, thank you both for that. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
All right, you're looking